So or the parts we're going to talk about here are parts you're going to see today in our activity in which you are looking at unfertilized egg. But all of these parts are also present if the egg were to be fertilized. Okay? We'll talk about what it looks like and what some other parts that form during, after fertilization takes place. So first of all, the shell of an egg. Obviously, it's a protective barrier. But what is it made out of? I remember what I said. I think we talked about this a while back when we did that osmosis egg thing. It's made of a certain element. Come on. Dean?
Protein.
No, not protein.
Cellulose.
No, it's a calcium compound. Calcium carbonate or a calcium compound. And that calcium is important. Because the shell isn't just a protective layer on the outside. The shell actually, calcium from the shell dissolves over time and is used. What part of our bodies is made mainly of calcium? Bones. And the calcium from the shell is actually used to make the bones of the embryo as it grows. And the way that happens, the embryo, because it's using energy from the yolk, it goes through the process of cellular respiration. And what's a byproduct of respiration? What gas? Get it? What? No? CO2, carbon dioxide. So as carbon dioxide is produced from the embryo, it dissolves and it forms an acid called carbonic acid. And carbonic acid is a mild acid. It's not that strong. But this carbonic acid, what it does, it starts to dissolve the shell slowly from the inside. And so as the shell starts to dissolve slightly with this carbonic acid, the calcium that's been dissolved can be absorbed by the embryo. And that calcium can go into making its bones. But it also has another benefit. Because as that calcium dissolves, what happens to the shell over time? It softens and gets thinner. And so therefore, when the chick is ready to hatch, it can more easily break out of that egg because some of the shell has been dissolved through those acids. So you have the shell. The layer beneath it is the shell membrane. The shell membrane is what provides a barrier to bacteria, because an egg is a great source of nutrients and so forth. The bacteria would be easily grow there. But the shell membrane helps prevent that. It also keeps all the moisture in, makes the egg waterproof. And that's the point of an egg. To allow reproduction on land, you need a moist environment within the egg. Probably know from looking at an egg, it's not a perfect oval. One end is sort of wider and one end is narrower. In this wider end, something called the air space forms. The air space, or sometimes called the air cell, basically has a little bubble of air, and it does a couple things. It's sort of a shock absorber, so if that egg gets jostled around, it's cushioned a little bit, but also right before hatching from the egg, the chick pokes its beak into that air cell and takes its first breath of air. Before that, it's absorbing air through the shell, through some vessels. After it pokes its beak into the air cell, it starts to actually breathe using its lungs, and then it breaks out of that shell. So it provides a chick's first breath. Okay?
Is that like when you hard-boil an egg and there's like a little...
Yep. So if you ever have a hard-boiled egg, you peel it completely, you'll see there's like a concave surface in the larger end. That's because that's where that air cell was. Or today when you look at the eggs, if you look, you're going to crack the egg, and when you look in the shell in the larger end, you'll see a little like bubble in there. That's the air cell. The yolk of the egg, what's its purpose? Joe?
place?
Not quite. Not- Yeah, it's nutrients. It's energy that the embryo is going to use. The yolk is made of fats, vitamins, minerals. And as that embryo grows from the earliest stages to the end stages, the energy it needs to grow comes from that yolk. It absorbs the energy present in that yolk. The membrane surrounding it just holds the yolk together, basically. And if you like your egg sunny side up, it's what you're trying not to break as you're making your eggs. Attached to that yolk are a couple white, stringy protein strands called the Ferliized. Basically, when the egg is fully intact, they stretch from one side of the egg to the other, and they kind of keep the yolk suspended in the middle of the egg so it doesn't like sink to the bottom when the egg moves around. So they hold the yolk in place. Albumin is what we call the egg white, which you probably call it if you're cooking with it. What is egg white? Like, what's the main nutrient? Dean? Protein. Albumin is basically protein and water. And as the embryo grows, it absorbs that protein and water, and it uses it in its growth. So, sometimes people, why would somebody go into a restaurant order an egg white omelet versus just a regular omelet? Dustin? Francesca?
It's like, because it's higher in protein.
Yeah, it has more protein, and also it has less what? Less fat. Because the fat of an egg is in the yolk. So if people are trying to eat less fat in their diet, then they just eat egg whites rather than whole eggs. On the yolk, and you'll see this in a little bit, there's a little white sort of patch on the yolk. It's pretty small, and you may never really notice it unless you're really looking for it. That patch is called the germinal disc, and in that is the blastoderm. That is the actual cell that, if it were fertilized, would have grown into an embryo. That starts as a single cell. If it's fertilized, it can grow into 2 cells and 4 cells, and eventually into the entire embryo. But as we talked about yesterday, you buy eggs at the grocery store, they're not fertilized. So that blastoderm doesn't divide. It doesn't grow into any part of an embryo because it has to be fertilized first. So as we look at the egg as it develops, at the embryo, obviously over a period of time, the embryo gets larger and larger. Eventually, towards the end, it fills up all of the egg. This is showing a chicken egg. Chicken eggs take about 3 weeks to develop and hatch. Over time, what happens to the yolk? It gets small. Why does it get smaller?
Because the embryo keeps like feeding off of it?
Yeah, because the embryo is using it for energy and is absorbing it. Okay? The embryo doesn't eat the egg yolk, though. Some people think like the embryo's in there like swallowing little bits of the yolk. It's attached to the abdomen, and vessels bring those nutrients directly into the chick embryo. Okay. So if we look sort of at a fertilized egg, the parts we just talked about are all still there, but there's some different parts that form. Still the embryo and the yolk and the albumin. But around the embryo forms a membrane called the amnion. And the allantois is a membrane that forms and also is attached internally to the embryo. So the embryo is obviously the bird that's growing. The allantois is, it removes waste that the embryo is producing, but it also allows that embryo to absorb oxygen from the outside. Oxygen can diffuse through the shell membrane into those vessels of the allantois and into the embryo. This amnion that surrounds the embryo that's just another form of a sort of shock absorber. It's filled with fluid. And so that embryo is sort of floating around in that fluid. If we look a little closer, we have again the embryo, the amnion, the yolk membrane which surrounds the yolk. But then once you see these lines are those vessels. And these lines, they carry nutrients from the yolk directly into the chick embryo. And from the allantois, same thing. They can carry oxygen into the embryo. They can carry carbon dioxide out from the embryo. So those vessels are very important. Over time, the yolk actually goes into the abdomen of the embryo as it's in its last stages of development. Every once in a while, if you're hatching chicks, you may see some hatch, but the yolk is still partially exposed and you can see it. But it absorbs into the embryo at the end stages of development. If we look at this sort of animation, this sort of shows you how things would look inside the egg over those 3 weeks of development. It's kind of neat. Oh, hold on. It's kind of neat to see. Why is this not working? No, it's still working. And that's that area that would develop if it were fertilized. This all happens in about a week. About 2 weeks in, basically all parts are formed. It continues to grow larger throughout that time. Towards the end, its beak starts to face the air sac. Breaks into that air sac first, and then starts trying to break out of that shell. That's sort of what it would look like. So the eggs you would go to the grocery store and get are unfertilized. As we talked about yesterday, their male was kept separate from the females, therefore there's no chance of them being fertilized and developing into the actual chick. Also, remember, some people get confused. They think fertilization happens after the shell is formed. It does not. That blastoderm gets fertilized first, and then all the parts form around it. But the female hen will continue to lay eggs even if they are not fertilized, and that's how we get our eggs. But you can buy fertilized, usually duck or chicken eggs. and it's commonly used as a food or a snack. It's a street food. Some parts of Southeast Asia, the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand. And it's basically a fertilized egg that's taken after the chick has had time to develop. And then it's usually steamed, so it is cooked, and then served. And basically you take the egg, crack the top off, and you drink the liquid that's in there, sometimes served with soy sauce or vinegar. And then what's left is the cooked, what remains of the yolk and albumin and the embryo itself. And you consume the whole embryo and all of it. It's early on in development, its bones have not had time to calcify yet, so you're not chewing on calcified bone. Basically, you chew the whole thing up and eat it, and it's very commonly in some parts of the world. You know, you can get a place like at the mall or something, the Loop Express. That's what it looks like once it's been opened. You have the embryo, you have the yolk that's slightly cooked. I've never tasted one of them. I didn't know about these when I was a meat eater. Okay, this is one where they've completely taken off the shell. Here's one skewers, see the chick embryos and so forth. So it is commonly, and this is a video maybe at the end of class, if I have time, I'll show you. This is a YouTube father-son people that were in the Philippines on vacation. Shows them, you know, learning about blue and how they're eating and so forth. It's kind of interesting to watch. But, you know, it's just chicken really, right? Just really young chicken. So, same thing. It is the same. It's chicken, right? The chicken you eat is a dead animal, a dead bird. Might as well eat it when it's in the egg.